welcome back to the next episode of Don't Fear the Wait. With me, your host, as per usual, in my little Harry Potter cupboard. I have got my lighting, though, sorted. I'm very, very happy that my lighting is all good. So the beautiful Mr. Will Carver is going to be very happy with me because I am actually listening and I'm doing the things that he's telling me to do. But me, as always, your host, the TinyTitan, again, with the big emphasis on the V because I'm the really tiny person, so I've got to have something to big me up. But on the other side of the world, who is joining me today is Mr. Luke Miller from No Switch Fitness. How are you, Luke?
Doing great. I'm really excited for this episode. It's a topic that I am very passionate about, and I think that the viewers will have like a lot of general takeaways for their own processes too, as far as taking it into their own muscle building and physique development journeys. So I'm excited to dive in.
I totally agree. So for people who do not know who you are, Luke, because I've been stalking you for a little while anyway, because I love your work. But you run your own podcast as well. So guys, just a little bit of a plug on that podcast too. So Luke runs the No Switch Fitness podcast. So go and give that a follow and a download too. But for people who don't know who you are, just give us a little bit of a rundown for us, if that's all right.
Yeah, so a little background on me. I'm a competitive bodybuilder. I'll be a heavyweight this year. I'm about 6 weeks out right now. I have a background in both engineering and exercise science. So I have a master's degree in exercise science and an undergrad degree in engineering. So I've done a lot of biomechanical work in the past and just kind of got into coaching via my own competing. I've competed 7 times already. So just falling in love with the process. And I did a lot of biomechanics based work in undergrad with my engineering stuff in the biomedical department, and then transitioned into my master's degree, which was very physiology based. And so that kind of led me down the route of coaching. I have a very big passion for elevating the industry when it comes to the standard at which we hold coaches, the amount of detail in which coaches approach their clientele's process and making it a individualized process. And I think that one of the big things you'll kind of see as we kind of walk through today's topic is I do think female physique development is one of the worst places for that. I do think that when it comes to prepping females, it takes a lot more critical thinking because you're dealing with a lot more variables. And it's not a one size fits all type of a thing. And I think it'll be interesting to kind of start to flesh out some ideas that maybe people haven't thought about, because it's definitely changed preps for some of my females so far. So I'm really excited to kind of get into it. But this is what I love. This is what I do. This is everything to me. Coaching is my legacy, even though I compete. So I'm really excited to dive in.
Okay, well, without further ado then, let's dive in. So this is all going to be about the women's physique and how we get to develop it. So if we have a look at, let's have a look at bikini first of all, and just kind of like break that down. Bikini, realistically, when that's like the first entry into bodybuilding, isn't it? So realistically, bikini people do not have to have a huge amount of muscle, but they have to have nice shape. They don't have to be striated. If they do have striations everywhere, then they're going to get marked down for the class. But what we're more interested in about is realistically putting more muscle onto that frame. So you mentioned that there was going to be a lot more critical thinking for women to actually build muscle. First off, why is that from your perspective?
Just the physiology behind the female, right? I mean, there's obviously a little bit more of a hormonal fluctuation throughout. This can get complicated with PED use because you'll see like premenopausal based symptomology in these girls that are trying to get into the bigger classes, which we'll touch on later. But there's just going to be a lot more to manage on the emotional side as well. So when it comes to client management as a coach, we have to understand the response to recovery variables for each individual female we work with. Now, there's the general topic of typically we see, females can handle a little bit more frequency, a little bit more volume. So we stereotypically see programs trend up. However, I will say that across individuals, we will see weeks 3 and 4 of menstrual cycle kind of bring them down further than the average female, where it would warrant some pullback during those weeks, to the point that I've seen it where if we stay on the normal program, the fatigue driven during those weeks actually slows down the contest prep process. And then this can further be applied to off season, where even though we may have more variables that support the recovery capacity, it's still good to be aware that if we're going to string progress across the long term, we need to be aware of how much we're being affected by the different phases, what's going on in those different phases. When are we getting like the progesterone spike and things like that? Testing lab work on day 21 to 24 of a menstrual cycle so that we get an accurate viewpoint of whether where they're at and whether they're actually seeing that progesterone spike. So just basic things like that, and building that into your trackers for females so that they can kind of see that trend over time. I think that is often missed. I think there's a couple people out there that do it really well. But I do think that we have to be aware of the multifactorial approach when it comes to females, in that we have trend lines, but we need to understand the inter-individual differences just on the base level before we even introduce anything exogenous that's typically in play when we're looking at those bigger classes, right? That figure, that women's physique, even getting into women's bodybuilding, right? So on the base level, it's going to come down to communication between the coach and the tracking, because the tracking will facilitate the communication, and the communication will manage the emotional side. And then that way you're always on the same page.
Absolutely. One of the biggest things that it grinds my gears when some coaches just literally do not take cycles into consideration. So what I really like doing is having that comparable month by month variable that you can have a look at, because that way you can actually see the trend like you were talking about. So in off season, you would really like to see that trend kind of being exactly the same. So, you know, between 24 and 34 days in terms of a menstrual cycle, because let's face it, nobody has a 28-day menstrual cycle. They're like magic fucking unicorns that survive in the wilderness. So they're non-existent. So obviously having that and making sure that they fall within those guidelines, and then also seeing, like you just said, are they going to be fatigued, or are they going to be superhuman? Because again, everybody responds to that progesterone spike in a very, very different way. And that will allow us to manipulate your nutritional variables as well, depending on that fatigue. When you see a woman who basically goes into the gym, they're having that progesterone spike, even though they may not notice it themselves because they've never tracked their periods previously. Women, please do track your periods. It makes life so much easier for you as well as your coach. But if you see one of your athletes, they go into the gym and then all of a sudden they're completely discombobulated, they fall over dumbbells, they can't lift 60 kilos off the floor and that kind of thing, and they're ready to bite your head off and throw shit around the gym, do you ask them to take a complete deload off the gym? And in terms of, if you can give us an example, maybe, do you change their nutrition to support their emotional wants and desires, even though it is going to be in contest prep?
During a prep, I would say I would lean towards not on the nutritional side, just because it's throwing in an extraneous variable that can't be controlled for if we give that much freedom. And I would say that that's a little bit specific to contest prep. On the training side, it's going to contextually be dependent upon how much fatigue accumulation has occurred across the previous phase. So if I know they're pretty deep into a training cycle, where fatigue should be accumulated pretty high, and now we're seeing that, then I'm probably leaning more into just going ahead and doing a training deload. If it's at a point where fatigue shouldn't be accumulated and it's strictly based on the progesterone spike response, it could be a combination of slightly lower volume plus an extra rest day, or some combination of those two. Typically most of the time is going to include an extra rest day during the week to spread the frequency out, which will spread the volume out and actually lower the volume via frequency, because frequency is a volume metric, right? And then I'll actually pull down the session volume a little bit, just so that I make sure that I don't push them over the cliff edge. And typically between those two, what I'll also do sometimes, depending on how bad it is, that extra rest day will still be training nutrition so that it supports the capacity to be able to train. But I will say that that's a one-off case and not all the time. Majority of the time, nutritional parameters will stay consistent. And it's more the training side I'm using to manage that period of time.
That's cool. And what about in terms of like scale fluctuations? I mean, I've had some contest prep clients who are in the middle of contest prep, and one of the worst things that I've come across personally is when people have been on birth control pill and then they come off birth control pill, and then all of a sudden it's like, what the hell has happened?
Yeah, birth control is an interesting topic. Just for context, preferentially, I do prefer if females are not on birth control, but obviously that is a very individual choice that needs to be made on a case-by-case basis, and like the actual reason it's being used.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain places where it's within our scope to suggest that it should be considered to be removed, and there's certain places in which it's used to help management of like endometriosis or things like that, where it might not fully be within our scope to make that suggestion. And you have to kind of know that line. But with the scale weight, I kind of do a week by week analysis, month to month.
Mm-hmm.
So comparing week 1 to week 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3, 4 to 4. Obviously, if you're pulling a birth control, that's basically just going to reset the tracking metrics, right? Because you're going to get that fluctuation. Typically for most females, if you set up that week 1 to week 4 paradigm where they compare 1 to 1, 2 to 2, etc., that's enough to keep them sane when they see the large weight fluctuation during week 4, week 3, week 4, to where it's like, okay, this is just part of my normal process. Like it'll clear once I get through this. So for the most part, that comparison chart is that. Now with the removal of birth control, that complicates things a bit. There's a lot of variables and considerations when it comes to like what generation birth control are they using? Are they using first, second, third, fourth generation? Are they using combo pill? Are they using mini pill? Have they had the depot shot? You know,
Oh, I hate that thing.
yeah. And so like there's large scales, right? Like someone coming off a depot shot is going to see a large change in physique presentation versus someone who may be taking like a newer generation mini pill.
Sure.
Might see a lot less. So contextually, a lot of variability. I think as a coach, our goal is to understand the variability in the sense that when variables change, how much it should affect that person, and not be reactive when we do see that change.
For sure. Now that's a really good answer. It's always been a fascinating case from mine in terms of like birth control. I second your opinion in saying like, you know, just get off birth control if we can. It's one of the better decisions than we can make.
Yeah, my wife's been off for, let's see, 2.5 years now. 2 years now, and it's the best decision she's ever made. She feels so much better. Everything is just like hormonally in a much better spot. Even like her training capacity, output, and recovery is higher. Physique development has occurred at a faster rate because we do know that estradiol is going to have a key role not only in recovery capacity but nutrient partitioning and things along those lines, right? So depending on, you know, the birth control that's in play will skew that, right? But it's one of the, every time I have a client that comes off of it, it's the best decision they've ever made. So I do highly suggest it, but I do get it if it's from a prevention of pregnancy standpoint and they're not going to be safe about the sexual activity that they're participating in. And then that kind of makes a little bit of sense to me, and I'm a little bit more lenient there, but it is always like a give and take, like a risk reward type thing of like, yeah, like you're taking it, you're getting that benefit, but if you would just have safe sex, like you might have a little bit better outcomes on the physique development side. So
brilliant. Okay, cool. So that is the first parameter that we've obviously just covered in terms of women are not just small men. We cannot treat them the same as small men because we have lots of different hormones as opposed to just one that we need to look after when it comes to men. When it comes to training, now I know that training is one of your massive passions, and I am insanely jealous and very, very, very pissed off that I cannot make it to the training seminar that you are going to be hosting over there. But, it's a long way to travel. I don't think COVID will allow
Little bit of a flight.
just a little one, but maybe sometime in the future. So let's get on to some training in order to build muscle. Now, we know that men can go into the gym, take a couple of shots of Pez. This is going to be really sarcastic, by the way, but this is why I'm saying it. We know that men can go in, take a couple of shots, do a couple of bicep curls, and come out looking jacked. Now, women, on the other hand, obviously cannot do that. So when you set up your training programming for women, and let's take women's physique as opposed to figure, because that's the closest kind of element that I can bring in comparison to a man. So women's figure, we obviously need more shape and that kind of thing, whereas women's physique, stroke bodybuilding, they need to basically have the same kind of structural parameters, I suppose, as a man. So when you were to set up a female physique development programming, what's the first thing that you do take into consideration, apart from, do I do the same split as a man, for example?
Needs analysis. So every client starts with a needs analysis. And so for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's basically a breakdown of where are you good, where are you bad, what's your movement capacity, what's your injury profile, things along those lines that will suggest not only session structure in the sense of like your split setup, but it'll suggest session structure in exercise selection and order. So injury profiles will predispose certain exercise sequencing that will require them to possibly deprioritize compounds or do them in a manner that's able to work around injury profiles, as just a quick example, right?
Yeah.
So once you walk through that needs analysis, you kind of see where a WPD athlete lacks, right? Which for a lot of WPD athletes, they're coming from figure for the most part. So what we'll commonly see is a little bit of back development needs to be there, just from like a density standpoint, especially like pulling up into a back double. And then oftentimes we'll see a little bit of quad development, because the first thing people think when you think from figure is like shoulder, 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 right? Set that frame, set that shape. So typically programming will be prioritized a little bit more towards those two. And then that'll just walk you through like how you set that up. So if you do like a basic priority principle, some concepts that you can think about when it comes to prioritizing body parts is going to be training it first after a rest day. So putting a session that's going to be a priority the day after a rest day, possibly skewing how much volume you do for those body parts, where instead of evenly dispersing across all, you kind of bias one versus the other. And then my favorite, which I think is the one that's left on the table the most, is the execution variable, which I do believe would be warranted before the volume manipulations, because I do think the majority of the time we see body part discrepancies be strictly execution based alone and not volume based. And so this is also assuming that effort applied is there. So if effort's an issue, then we can also talk about that, which typically that piece is within quad development is the effort piece, just because you have to take it somewhere that you can't. And I'm a really big advocate of, especially, so my girls that are in that figure physique honestly train harder than some of my guys, but they do a lot better with a training partner because of that security. I mean, I think that's most people, but especially within the female realm, of having that spot and being able to take it there. And so when we're teaching that effort piece, it's always good to have someone who's already been in the system or a system similar to mine and can fully kind of explain that process.
Indeed, yeah. And do you actually find that women across all of the realms, not just in terms of physique and bodybuilding, but across like everything, do you find that women will find it a lot harder to actually get their legs to have more development and more cuts, more visual development than compared to any other body part?
I wouldn't say across the board. I think that obviously, I mean, weight holding like different areas is going to be make it a little bit harder to get in the same condition as the average male, right?
For sure.
But I wouldn't say technically from a developmental side. I think where I see the development issues is a mental capacity to train with the effort that is needed to develop a body part like that, minus you're genetically gifted. When a lot of females get into fitness and then competing in the first place, like you said, it's often a progression from bikini wellness. They kind of get too big for that and get into figure. That capacity to train with everything left on the table is not been fully developed. And that needs to be developed within proper execution, which is where a lot of the times you see the leg development not quite fully there. Now, if you have a girl coming from wellness, that's probably not the case. But yeah, I mean, I think back is probably the number one, followed by legs, just because back's such a hard body part to train, and most people don't get it right. While it is a big part of like figure, if you're talking like that competitor that moves from figure to physique, I still think it's bastardized a lot. And in fact, it's kind of typically the first thing in 8 out of 10 female clients that we're breaking down fully for most of them.
That's interesting. That's interesting, actually. So one of the biggest things that I find interesting about it is because, I mean, everybody's always very self-critical, aren't we, right? So everyone's going to look at themselves and go, oh, I've got this shit part and that shit part. And my shit part, like 18 months ago, was my back. And I just thought, you know what, I've got to bring up my posterior chain. That is the one thing that I have to do. And then all of a sudden, I started looking at my physique and my check-in photos and things like that. And I just thought, okay, so my back is now one of my overpowering elements because you've been focusing on it so hard. And it's not like I just prioritized that. But what I have found as well, and it's not just women, it's men at the same time, I do find that they can do their front pose and they can do a front relaxed and they look phenomenal. And then they turn to the side and then they disappear. And there's nothing there because they've lost all of the density. And then they turn to the back and again, you have no density there. Now, from my perspective, I think it's because we pay so much attention in the gym. I see it all the time in the gym that I train at, and it does my head in. But people like look at themselves training. Have you got clients that video themselves in the gym and they look at the camera as they're doing the exercise?
No, because I literally say that within the first week.
Yeah, me too. I'm like, stop looking at the camera.
I think that videos are probably one of the biggest tools we can use if used correctly.
Sure.
From like a feedback perspective, not only to me, but to themselves, right? Because you're going to have a lot of people that are visual learners. I do think that this is going to be very anecdotal in nature, but there are some intangibles when it comes to building density that I think is sometimes missing, like the capacity to hip hinge at a very, very large capacity. Specifically, probably more like the RDL based hip hinge rather than like a conventional pull, just because of the levers of the pull. But you don't see females hyper focusing on getting stupid strong within some of those base patterns. But then on the flip side, also being accurate within what we could consider possibly auxiliary patterns, like your single arm rows, your pull downs, things like that. And the best back progress, both like density with overall development, comes with the combination of those two. I'm not about to sit here and say that we need to sling weight like a Branch Warren, but at the same time, I'm not going to say that we need to pink dumbbell it and draw force vectors on these videos, right? Yeah. I think that there's a tidy balance to be able to play there. And I'm never going to give someone shit for getting fucking hype and pulling a PR that's 85% of execution, right? Make a comment, say, hey, great pull. Let's tidy it up at this weight for over the next week or two, and then we'll make that load progression. Because I think there's an intangible aspect to a physique when the passion for that kind of training is there. I just see it time and over again.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of like see people concentrate on the mirror muscles so much.
Yeah.
And, that's the reason why they like training in front of a mirror, because they like seeing themselves pumped up. And that's the reason why they forget the density. because it's like when I get people and they send me videos and they're doing their bent over rows, which is like another bastardized movement that is completely compounded in the gym, as well as the RDLs, and you see them do it and then they turn their head and they look at the camera and then they're carrying on doing it, and it's like, dude, you just put yourself completely out of alignment. And this is the reason why we're saying, don't look at the fucking camera. That's my job. Just put it on, forget about it, and just carry on with it. But yeah, I do think that a lot of people lack that density, and it shows in their physique when they do those quarter turns, because they concentrate too much at admiring themselves in the mirror as opposed to focusing on the heavy work that they need to be doing, right?
Yeah, and we're in a very visual sport, so sometimes it's hard. On the camera piece, one thing I found is there's an app called Monster Media they can use that allows them to video while music's still playing.
Oh, okay.
And so that capacity to be able to have music in there still allows them to focus a little bit more. And I've seen a large reduction in that desire to want to look at the camera because they got that music in their ear. And for a lot of people, that's like a Pavlov's dog mechanism, which is basically just a psychological cue that, okay, it's time to get shit going. It's time to train, right? So it kind of finds that balance of getting that video feedback, but still keeping them a little bit more focused.
Okay, that's really cool. I like that one. So I'll put that note actually in the YouTube comments so people can have a look and download that one, because yeah, that is one thing that you do really need to like get away from people is watching yourself in the video. Just push record and then get on with your shit. Okay, awesome. Now, just based on the hip hinge, I did get a question for yourself, and I really wanted to kind of get your ideology on this one. So the question was, what is your viewpoint on wearing a belt in a hip hinge?
Oh, 10 times out of 10.
As in like wear it or don't wear it?
As in wear it.
As in wear it.
Yeah. So I could go deep into this. Let me just give a basic overview.
Okay.
So everything from your shoulder to your pelvis is considered a tin can of pressure. Okay.
Yeah.
So your capacity to output via your levers that are attached to that has a lot to do with how much pressure we can create within that tin can. So if you can imagine having a tin can that has like an accordion in it versus a solid tin can, obviously the one that's the solid tin can is going to be a lot more stable than the accordion, right?
Right. So
for a basic overview on breath mechanics, it has a lot to do with maintenance of rib cage to pelvis. So like when you hear me say like pelvic to rib cage line is maintained within a pattern. The reason that we do that is because it allows breath cycle to connect the thoracic diaphragm with the pelvic diaphragm. So pelvic floor is also another term that you'll hear used for that.
Yeah.
Because the capacity for those to be in alignment and create pressure allows them to create pressure. So you'll see a lot of people that like when they hip hinge, they'll like extend their back and open up the rib cage and things along those lines. Which is a rate limiter for how much force they can exert through their hamstrings and glutes. And we'll get into lats in a second, because they're not creating that pressure through the tin can. So first off, we use the pelvic to rib cage alignment as the main pressure gradient or force or pressure developer within that rib cage to pelvis area. However, the belt is going to be able to provide a counter force that allows for the pressure gradient to get higher.
Yeah.
So when we develop force within that tin can, we need counter force in order to be able to maintain it. So depending on the pattern, you're going to see either anterior or posterior muscles provide some of that counter force. Within a hip hinge, a lat is a very strong counter force within that. But having the belt around you also is a counter force to help maintain that pressure and the diameter of the cylinder that allows for pressure to develop across that diameter. So very important. And then you can kind of get into like breath cycle mechanics within the pattern to maintain that pressure if need be. But I would 100% say that a belt within top set, back all sets is definitely necessary. I would say it's probably not warranted in all your warm-ups though. So what I do is I kind of like prep my bracing patterns in my warm-ups leading up to my top set. I'll wear my belt on my last warm-up, which is typically 90% of the weight I plan to pull for my top set. And that's the first implementation of the belt. And I'll do it for however many hip hinge sets I have that day, which right now is 2. So yes, 100% should be using a belt.
Wicked. And would you go, just out of my own curiosity, because I've got a background in powerlifting as well, would you go with a lever belt, like an SBD lever belt, or would you actually go with like a buckle that isn't the same diameter all the way around?
I use personal preference there. Just because you're going to have some people like, I can't use a lever belt. And the reason is because the millimeter thickness of it digs so hard into my obliques and like abdomen that it limits my capacity to create that brace. Right. However, I know some people that absolutely fucking love it. So I don't get too picky on the belt selection as long as it's a personal, they're able to do what they need to do.
For sure. So I use a lever belt just because it's really quick and easy to get it off. Rather than trying to fight with it, you know, it's even worse. Like when you're putting on knee sleeves and you do like a really heavy set of a leg press and then you can't get your knee sleeves off. It's just the same kind of thing. With a lever, it's just like quick release mechanism. So just pull it off that quick. Okay, fabulous. So I'm glad about that one. I'm going to keep on throwing in these questions because I had a fair few ones which are quite cool. Okay, so we're looking at training. We're looking at training setup, and we're focusing on the weaker elements. Now, I want to get into exercise selection. So would you realistically choose the same kind of exercise selection as you would for a male in regards to bringing up a female's physique as well?
I don't think it varies too much. I mean, I think priority across the patterns may differ a smidge, but and then obviously, so the one place it will differ a lot is the mechanics of the individual, because on average, females are going to be shorter than males.
Yeah.
So that's kind of maybe the one place in which variations of patterns may change. As in, like, I see a lot of females be able to drive a back squat a lot higher than a lot of males, just simply from the levers of their capacity to be able to back squat. Sure. But other than that, it's not really going to change exercise selection. What'll change is the prioritization of the exercise selection, depending on what needs to be developed.
For sure. And are you a fan of the barbell back squat as opposed to maybe just like putting them into a machine, or would you cycle those?
I think a barbell back squat's one of the most underutilized patterns within a physique development program. Mm-hmm. However, I will say it will be very, very dependent upon how someone moves within a back squat. So for someone like me, 5'9", terrible ankle mobility, not great internal rotation of the femur, a back squat doesn't make a lot of sense because it turns into a glute movement for me. Yeah. However, a lot of females, you don't see that issue. So it turns into a great way to load a stretched position, not only for a quad, but a stretched glute. And so I do have a tendency to program barbell back squats within female programs a little bit more than males, because we see that capacity to be able to squat be a little bit higher within females than males. Context as to where they are during the season helps, as in, for example, like Emily had barbell back squats in her off-season program. So we continued them into prep, but as her waist got smaller and smaller, the capacity to brace becomes lower and lower because that midsection is getting smaller. So it's something that we pull from she has the capacity to output, but she just can't create the brace to output, and we move into a machine. I think that if some people within our sport and physique development took the time to develop their functional capacity within the basic barbell movements, you would see their ability to perform an output within the standard bodybuilding machine work that we see take leaps and jumps forward if we understood, or if we had a better understanding of the integration of mobility and stability within someone's capacity to output. And we would see a lot faster physique progress if we took the time to do that.
I totally agree. I totally agree with you. I think that barbell movements are far underrated and underutilized, especially in females. But again, I mean, I suppose it comes down to the idea of having that spot and having that security. You know, if a woman loads up 100 kilos or like 200 pounds on a barbell back squat and they don't have a spot, it can be quite intimidating, can be quite scary, can't it? So they can always, and then we talk about the effort thing. So if they're scared, they're going to be putting on less weight on the bar, which can perceive them to have less effort because they haven't got that security blanket behind them.
Yeah, I have some people who train with partners. Sometimes partners don't, not like just depends on schedules, right? So I program a rotary pattern there. So like week 1 is barbell back squat, week 2 is a machine-based squat, and then they have 2 variations to play with where even if they don't have a training partner for 3 straight weeks, they can just lean into the machine-based squat rather than trying to barbell back squat. So there's ways to work around it.
Absolutely.
I think that that's one, and that I use that within preps too. So like for example, like if someone's a very quad dominant squatter and I like their squat pattern for quad development, we can program like a hack squat and a back squat with that high bar propensity within a program as in a rotary fashion, and then just pull the barbell back squat when their capacity to brace is lower.
Fantastic. Yeah, I really like that one. So I like the 2 variations as well. So I like rotation A, rotation B on every single one because it, from my perspective as well, and from my point of view of how I've always programmed everybody, and that's not just bodybuilders, that's like strongmen and powerlifters at the same time. It gets you stronger across the board and it stops you from stalling out too quick. So we know even from a powerlifter, if you just kind of keep on adding volume and adding volume and adding volume or just wait to the bar, they're going to stop because I mean, what are you going to do next? Just like lift the gym? You know, you can't do that. So by having those different variations, different rep ranges, different weights, and different machinery or equipment, you can obviously stop stalling out that click.
From a psychological perspective too, it gives them more time to adapt to create the progression, right? So they're more likely to progress 2 weeks between movements rather than one.
Absolutely.
See more buy-in from the female athlete and less, I hate to say this, but like emotional breakdown within the gym for not progressing that week because it's spread out a little bit more and they have more time to go under the adaptation to progress too.
For sure. Do you find that women find themselves bored quicker than men?
Yes. Oh my God, yes. It's funny you say that because my wife's like that 101. Um, it yes, but I think that if you build in some autonomy to the program, you can negate that. So prime example, right? So you've mapped out like the main movements, the main compounds that are there. Within later in the session, you're giving them like overhand machine row of choice or something along those lines, right? Give them the goal of the exercise, but allow them to kind of flex whatever that looks like. And then that way they can find the one that fits them the best. And then you can kind of look at the video, the one they choose, give them some tips, or maybe suggest a different setup because of whatever your logic behind that setup is. And that autonomy will help with that when we see that within a client. But yes, I do see that quite a bit. And there's nothing wrong with rotating programs like on a little bit more of a frequent basis in order to do that either. Like even if they're getting something out of the program, like you don't have to fully change the entire program. You can change some aspects of it and give it that fresh feel, right? And still keep like the cornerstones of it moving forward. So I think there's ways as coaches that to combat that, we just have to be open and communicate that kind of stuff, right? I think that that's where most people fail is not communicating with their clients.
Totally agree. Yeah, it is a big thing. One of my I do have this thing that I say, and I don't know if you've seen it on my Instagram or whatever, but my catchphrase is just don't be an arsehole. And it's like if there is a problem and you are experiencing a problem, don't be an arsehole, just talk to me about it. Because if you don't talk to me about it, then I cannot prevent you or stop you from being an arsehole. And it's the same across the board. If from training to eating to hunger to being annoyed and etc. You just have to be open and communicative and put it down on paper, you know, and just actually talk to people. But that's my little mini rant. But anyway, right, okay, so moving swiftly on from that. So we've got some muscle, we've got some exercise selection, we've got a good routine and a training base and that kind of thing at the same time. Okay, one of women's favorite things to do, which prevents them from building muscle, is cardio. What do you see women when they come to you and they say, right, Luke, I want to get massive because I want to get up to the next class. And you say, okay, this is what we're going to do with your cardio and basically stop you from being a 6-7 day a week cardio bunny and just basically strip that back. I mean, when we're looking at building the physique, do you keep cardio in the off season?
Yeah, for sure. I do have a tendency to lean into step counts though. From a fatigue perspective, just managing fatigue is a lot easier with step counts than it is with Stairmaster or elliptical, because to the same point, like you've got these females that you tell them to get on an elliptical because it's lower impact than Stairmaster, and they're just fucking booking it. And it's like, we're not really saving really any fatigue by switching the implement in which the cardio is doing, right? So moving them to steps is probably a very good one. And here's another reason why. It opens them up to activities that they may have not considered been an activity that fits within their bodybuilding lifestyle beforehand too, which what I've found, especially with the female that gets bored, helps them a shit ton, because they can now go for their hike with their dog and take the Instagram picture and get their steps. And they can, you know, go do whatever activity it is that requires them to do a lot of steps in order to do it. And now they can fit that in within their activity goals. And it's like, okay, not only are we saving the fatigue of, well, now this female just went and did this 3-hour hike and then is going to say, because my plan says to do a 30-minute cardio session, I'm gonna go home and do a 30-minute cardio session and add to that, right? We understand activity on a day-to-day basis a lot better, because it's all energy output at the same time. So if it's a lazy Sunday and you got to go do 30 minutes of treadmill incline walking to hit your steps, then you go do that. But if it's like a booked Saturday with friends and family and you're doing activities all day, you probably don't have to get on any cardio implement. So that's probably the best way to combat it, because it not only combats like cardiovascular activity, driving fatigue up and limiting the capacity to drive off seasons as far as we can, but it also garners the benefit of like activity helping with like nutrient partitioning and things like that. But it opens up other activities that this person may enjoy, which from an adherence standpoint is probably one of the biggest things that can contribute to long-term progress.
For sure. I'm of the same mindset. I really, really like steps in the off season as opposed to cardio, because like you just said there, if we prescribe cardio to a woman, they do not accept that just going outside for an hour or going for a hike for 2 hours, like you said, is constituted as cardio, because it's like, okay, you need to do cardio. In the lockdown, that was like the worst. When I was giving my clients cardio, they were like, well, I don't know what to do because I haven't got an elliptical at home. I haven't got any cardio equipment. I'm like, dude, we can do a circuit, you know? And I remember videoing a circuit with my lad out in the back garden. And I was like, just do this circuit, you know, it's cardio and it's fun, you know? I mean, I was like, had him on my back and I was doing press ups with him on my back. And I'm like, this is just a circuit to get my heart rate up. I'm doing burpees together and shit. I mean, yeah, okay, it's not bodybuilding, but it's expenditure. So again, it got us out and it got us doing a fun thing in the summer. But one thing that I did, a funny story, I had this girl who was, she was actually recovering from an eating disorder as well. So trying to get her cardio limits down and just allow her to understand that steps were constituted there, and trying to get her calories up at the same time. I told her to go out for a walk with her mum and her dog. And it was going to be every Friday. And this was the walk that she was going to do. And she was going to walk from one town to the other. And when she got to that other place, she was to stop at a shop and just buy herself an ice cream, whether it be like a Solero or something like that, which is like 98 calories or something ridiculous. But then they sit down under a tree with the dog, with the ice cream, and then they walk back. And you know what? It was the best thing ever, because she got her steps in. She reduced her cardio output because it was a nice leisurely walk that she did with her dog. And then she got over some kind of eating disorder parameter because of the fact that she was having an ice cream. So it was quite a nice little touch that we did in terms of her off season. And she went on stage and did bikinis. This was like after 3 years of working, by the way. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, let's do a contest prep after coming from an eating disorder, because that's not clever. Point taken. But yeah.
I think it opens up to, like, for people who struggle with sleeping, walking outside when the sun's coming up and you see the horizon, and then when the sun's coming down and you see the horizon. There's some literature that suggests that walking outside as the sun's setting alongside like looking at the horizon, like that side to side eye motion, can help with the production of sleep hormones. So it'll allow for better capacity to sleep. From a stress management standpoint, it gets them away from a screen. So it allows them to like enjoy the view and things like that. And it's kind of like a decompress thing as well. So it's actually become a part of, I have like sleep routines for my clients. And so that like afternoon night walk of like sometime around the sun setting, if possible, is started to become a routine for a lot of my clients, and it helps them a lot as well.
Yeah, that's really nice. I really like that. It kicks in your circadian rhythm. For all of the sciencey people out there who want to just kind of go, oh, he's talking about the circadian rhythm. Yeah, I think
Yeah, if I have a tendency to go too deep on anything, like just stop me. Like I can't
I
help
love it. I love all the deep stuff. Honestly, I could talk about this for hours. It's great. I love all the hippie woo-woo shit as well. So things like grounding and, you know, just going sitting in a forest. Have you heard about that? It's like an old Japanese thing that people do, and they just go and sit in a forest and just kind of chill out for a little bit.
Yeah, I think all of that could fall into meditation practices, and
Totally, yeah.
might not need a forest in our backyard to do that.
Mm.
And find a different way. I know a lot of my girls like to journal.
Yeah,
Journaling is a really good one, especially like right before bed. Just kind of get your thoughts out, do something along those lines.
for
So
sure.
sounds kind of crunchy granola-ish, but it works for a lot of people.
Granola is anabolic though, right? You always have granola
I
before.
wish granola was in my plan right now.
Funny. For people who don't know, Luke's on prep, so he probably can't even sniff granola at this moment in time. You
Yeah.
have to go really quite low on your prep as well, don't you, calorie wise?
Yeah, so I think like right now my carbohydrates on training days are 90, maybe 100.
Oh,
I'm
wow,
like
really? Total?
yeah,
Wow.
I get low. I have what's called an adaptive metabolism. So with each change, I don't typically quite make as big of a change as the average individual.
Mhm.
So like my off seasons get really high, but my preps get really low. And so I end most preps around 12 to 1300.
And
It
what's your normal stage weight? So you're 5'9", and what's your normal stage weight?
That's a good question. I have not competed at the same stage weight ever before,
Amazing.
because I keep jumping weight classes. I'm waking up like 211, 212 right now. So I'm almost ready, to be honest. I'll
Mhm.
probably be like 208 fasted, fully skinned, maybe
Nice.
207.
Nice.
Uh, which, if I look at the pictures from the last time I competed, I was 197 last time, but I'm the same condition now, 6 weeks out, that I was on stage. So probably about 15 to 16 pounds tissue accrual over a year and a half. So
That's pretty damn good. That's pretty good going. And just for a comparison, so I mean, guys, you obviously think we always say embrace the suck, but people who are like, oh my god, my carbohydrates are only 300. Yeah, Luke's on like 90, so suck it up. But just as a comparison, what was Emily on when she was in the last few weeks in terms of
don't
prep?
want to ask that question. So Dad's last few weeks, her training days consisted of 60 grams of pumpkin with 35 grams of cream of rice. So that's, what is that, 24 plus 10? It's about 30 grams of carbs on training days, 35. And then she had protein veggie days with some fats in there on rest days. So she's never really truly been in show shape.
Okay.
This is she competed last in 2017. So it's, first off, it's been a long time, but second off, she was as lean as she was on stage last time at 15 weeks out this year.
Oh
So
wow.
she's in very uncharted territory when it comes to where she's at right now. So it sucks, but it's exciting for her because, I mean, her activity didn't get too high. The highest it got was 80 minutes with like 6,000 steps.
Oh, that's
Um,
okay. Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah, but what we've done is we've pulled that cardiovascular activity back to 65, and now her steps are a bit higher,
Yeah.
um, and so it's just allowed for better fatigue management. I think next prep, what we'll do is she'll be in a better spot because she'll be more focused in the off season. So I can run the beginning part of prep strictly on steps and then
Mm.
add cardiovascular activity as a progression on the activity later in the prep, where it may look like steps at like 12 or 13,000 with cardiovascular activity at like 30 minutes. So
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, what's so beautiful about it is that Emily, I mean, I spoke to you about it on Instagram anyway. Emily looked absolutely diced, peeled, and perfect. You know, she came in beautifully, and even in comparison to the other girls, it was almost like she was in a league of her own. You know, she was dialed beautifully. But this is what it obviously takes. And the beautiful thing is that because you're with her every day, you can see the small detail changes, which in my point of view, I don't think that sometimes check-in photos can show you. And I think that's one of the barriers that we have as online coaches, that photos don't do the individual justice in a way.
Yeah, it's where the communication piece comes in, right? Like, now let me be very careful about this conversation, because I have very strict times in which I'm Coach Luke and strict times in which I'm husband Luke.
Sure.
But at the same point, I do get to see her kind of throughout the day, right? And so we've had a couple things where it's like shit hit the ceiling fan pretty fast, but I was able to see it happen and react to it, and pull blood work and figure out what was going on and then fix the issue. Which,
what was one of those examples, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, so this is a good one, and a pet peeve of mine at the same time. So we'll dive in. So I would say about 12 weeks out, 11, somewhere in that 11 to 12 week out mark, she started experiencing like massive fatigue. And I'm talking like not 11 to 12 weeks out fatigue, right?
Okay.
Right? So first thing I thought was like, okay, she's been training pretty hard for a pretty long time, so we'll pull back on the training a bit. Didn't help at all. So after like 3 days of like little to no training, 4 days of little to no training, still felt the exact same. And I was like, something's not right. Her rate of progress had slowed as well. And so I was like, let's just pull lab work, see what's going on. So we went and pulled a hormonal profile and a thyroid panel. And come to find out, she had diet-induced HPA axis essentially shut down. So estradiol was tanked, progesterone was tanked, testosterone was somewhere around 15, 20, like super low. I want to say it was like, it may have been lower than that, like 12 or 15. I have it in the sheet. But anyway, so again, just for back reference, no AIs in play, no nothing in play, like, right, like this should not be happening. So what we did is, obviously you don't want to run a contest prep where a female runs tanked estradiol and progesterone the entire prep. Estradiol is going to have a role in fatty acid mobilization within the fat loss process. So we implemented an Hrt protocol. So we did, I want to say it was like 7 mgs a week of test, with 0.2 milligrams of bioidentical transdermal estradiol, and a bioidentical oral progesterone. And we brought her back up to what would be considered normal levels hormonally. So right at the top end of testosterone, right at the top end of natural levels of testosterone, estradiol to progesterone ratio was restored. And sure enough, she fucking booked it over the next 12 days. She lost like 8 pounds in 12 days or something like that.
Wow. Yeah.
My point with this being, how many times have you seen a coach send a gear protocol mapped out across the contest prep that says, okay, include Primo here, include Nolvadex or Remedex here, include Anavar here, have Winnie on hand for here? It's like, how the fuck do you know this? You are not reacting to what the individual was doing. If I would have just followed some script with Emily, I'm making a bad problem worse.
Sure.
Right. And I'm not going to say that there's not situations in which maybe an AI could be warranted at the end of a contest prep for a female, because you typically would like to see an estradiol panel somewhere around 30 at the end of a contest prep, where all season you want to let it trend higher, somewhere in the 50 to 100. And then stereotypically run around a 10-to-1 estradiol to progesterone ratio. So with that in mind, like, why are we okay with these coaches running the same script? The Primo in at 12 weeks out, Anavar in at 8 to 9 weeks out. We're introducing an AI at 8 weeks out, right? Let alone like Nolvadex's influence on hypertrophy via the GH, the IGF-1, or any AIs, but Nolvadex especially, on hypertrophy mediated through GH-IGF-1 axis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just wish there was a higher level of critical thinking. It does come with a cost, though, is the only problem, because lab testing is not free. So this is where, as coaches, it puts us in a weird spot, because suggested practice should be to pull labs to make decisions.
Yeah.
So in the example of Emily, I figured out what the fatigue problem was. So I knew that extra estradiol was going to be needed to get her through the contest prep, not an AI, right?
Sure.
Exogenous help in order to help, right? So point being here is, ideally we would be using that to help decision making with inclusion of thyroid hormone.
Yeah.
We can pull labs to see where TSH, T4, T3 relationships are in order to make that decision of when thyroid hormones included. A lot of people want to make the suggestion of combo pills, like T4, T3 combos.
Yeah.
Sometimes that misses the consideration that T4 to T3 conversion will lower as you prep. So it won't be as impactful as you get later into the prep. So sometimes it's just a little bit more easier to manage if you just include the active thyroid hormone. But I mean, it's going to work either way. You can just supplement with active T3 if you use a combo pill. But with all that being said, I just want to promote like a critical thinking process that allows for people to test and make decisions based off of that. And is another thing to consider when getting ready for a contest prep, if you're financially in a position to be able to do that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because it does cost. I want to say her lab work was like $115 US. So, I mean, not terrible, but like not everybody has $115 laying around to do that whenever they want. So just something to kind of build into the budget and understand. And I think if a coach communicates that, then it allows the individual to be prepared for that when it's coming up.
Definitely. I mean, it is extremely important. Whenever I do any kind of consultations, even when I just send out my forms, I will talk about PED advice and PED use, and then in huge asterisks and huge bold letters, it's like bloods are required before the conversation is even entered into, you know, because it is massively important. I mean, even just by taking orals, you're going to have a look and see what your liver function is doing, as well as your kidney function. And even by taking a higher protein intake, for example, that's going to spike some ALT levels into your liver. So these are the kind of things that we all have to be really considerative of. And even if you're not going to be taking PEDs, I do think for a natural, women should especially have a look at their hormone function, you know, because just like you were saying there, naturally your hormones are going to get tanked. You are going to be in an energy deficit. And this is what we're talking about. We're talking realistically about REDS, aren't we? So relative energy deficiency in sport is what the scientific term is. But this is what we enter into. So when men enter into it, their testosterone levels get tanked. When women enter into it, we can enter into a whole new realm of different parameters. And everybody knows my story. So my very first contest prep, I was prepped abysmally. And this is one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because of the simple fact that we haven't got, you know, at that point back in the day, there wasn't any kind of critical thinking. I was prepped like a man. My hormones were tanked. My menstrual cycle was completely eradicated. And it took me 7 years it's still not back, you know, it's completely shut and gone. But it took me 7 years for the doctors to actually say, do you know what? Okay, you are a prime candidate for HRT, and hence the reason why I am on exogenous hormones, which is the reason why I'm not classed as natural anymore. So I can't obviously compete in natural shows.
Right.
But this is why it's really, really important for you to do these kind of tests. So build it into your budget.
I'm going to advocate something here. So my wife is a medical practitioner, so she's going to hear me say this and probably not be very happy, but I'm a big advocate of being your own personal advocate when it comes to taking advice from medical professionals. I'm not saying that medical professionals aren't good at what they do or trained at what they do. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to hormone replacement therapy for females within the medical community, and it's very inaccurate. I have a client who was a candidate for HRT. The first suggestion was 25 mg of testosterone a week.
Right, okay, to hopefully aromatize it into the estradiol.
Are you fucking kidding me though? Like 25, I mean, and a man's going to listen to this that hasn't had exposure to this and think like that's nothing. But for reference, like most females can HRT somewhere between 3 to 7 mgs a week.
Yeah, easy.
Right. And 3 to 7 mgs net, because like you can sometimes calculate like if it's 10 mgs in an insulin pen, what's caught in the actual thing that's left when you pin it is only going to be 5 to 7.
Yeah.
And you actually have to get that compounded at a pharmacy in order to do that. But my point being is be your own advocate. If something sounds a little fishy or you're just not so sure about it, ask someone who's done it with other people before. Maybe find a progressive HRT doctor, because there are plenty of progressive hormonal replacement therapy doctors out there, and it'll save you a lot of headache.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really nice thing, actually. So yeah, we will actually build that in. I'll put that into some notes at the same time, just basically saying be your own advocate, so because that's a really nice one. One thing I wanted to finish up on is PEDs, so performance enhancement drugs, realistically, because we did say off air, it's like, can we be open about PEDs? It's like, yes, absolutely. Because I don't want it to be shut down. I don't want it to be a taboo subject. This is bodybuilding, and women, you cannot say to me that women on the Olympia stage do not take exogenous assistance. Come on, guys, be real. Of course they bloody do. But there are safe ways of taking performance enhancement drugs. So let's obviously talk about building that size. There is a requirement to have those exogenous drugs. So what, I mean, obviously we're not going to go into dosages or anything like that, but your viewpoint on PEDs, what is the best kind of thing to start on advocating from, you know, not obviously saying do this, do that, do the other, but your viewpoint.
Right. Let me get some caveats here. First off, more does not equal more.
Yeah.
I've run across some people that top level coaches that when people want to transition into a bigger class, like the first comment back is it's going to take double the PED usage. It's like, well, no, maybe just time, you know, like that's the variable. So that would be conversation number one. Always go towards MED, which is minimum effective dose.
Yeah.
And then understand like some of the downstream mechanisms of the compounds that are being utilized within females. So just a stereotypical thought process is we're not really wanting anything that aromatizes into estrogen for the most part, unless it's within a hormonal replacement therapy setting.
Yeah.
Your 101s you go for there are DHT derivatives. So your masterons, your primos, things like that. Always start with limited exposure as well. So I'm going to go down this route. Okay. So Sarms are not technically where I think that they're overly beneficial yet.
Okay.
The only one that I think that has some literary data that can be backed up is Osterine.
Cool.
And so for introductory females, kind of like not so sure if this is the route that they want to go, maybe Osterine is first line.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't care how many bikini girls use it. Cardarine is not a SARM, so don't use it, please. There's other ways we can stimulate that pathway for fat loss. But my point being is first line would maybe be an Osterine. A lot of people skip that first line because it's not overly effective, and I would agree with that. And I would say that that's probably accurate in the sense that if you're really truly wanting to get into upper levels of figure or WPD, taking that step might not be overly necessary. Dietary drugs would be secondary. So within a contest prep, that's going to be your clenbuterol, your T3s, because clenbuterol is going to have an anabolic effect and a capacity to retain muscle across a prep. And so that would be kind of step number 2, looking at PEDs. But when we're actually looking at like things that are anabolic in nature, or more anabolic in nature, I should say, typically the first ones that come up are going to be Primo or Anavar. I will admit that I lean towards Primo's suggestion if I know that they can get real Primo.
Yeah.
Reason being, I mean, Anavar and Primo are faked at unbelievably high rates. So you're running a risk whether you choose one or the other, right? One of the reasons being is that over a long-term process, one, we can use Primo a little bit further into their process in the sense that once Anavar really gets over 10 mgs, it's probably more detrimental to health than we would like it to be.
Mm-hmm.
For most people. Not saying that people don't use more than 10 mgs. I've seen plenty of pros taking 25 mgs a day. But my point being is you can kind of introduce them to Primo as the safer alternative because of the lack of health detriment that it's going to have there.
Yeah.
Now, the risk you're running is that Primo is often faked for test. So if you start to see the stereotypical side effects of clitoral enlargement, excessive hair growth, things along those lines, I 10 times out of 10 suggest pulling it.
Yeah.
So it's not worth ruining that feministic side of someone to do that. Like I said, always do minimum effective dose, see what the result is. Everybody's going to have an inter-individual response to a milligram per kilogram dose, which is why we don't give milligram per kilogram suggestions most of the time. And then what I would say from there is max out how much you can get out of that before escalating. And that process for a lot of people is not very short, as in you can use very minimal compound usage and get a female very far with physique development. And then I would say your best variable is time. Like give yourself the time to progress. And then the only other caveat I would say to this is where females run into issues with virilization, side effects based things. It's going to be the duration of time in which they use compounds, not as much the amount that they use all the time, if they're choosing the correct compounds. And the reason I say that is because like we typically don't want to see a female on for longer than 12-ish weeks.
Yeah.
Obviously there's going to be contest prep situations in which that has to happen because of stringing shows together, or they're doing another show that they weren't planning on doing, or whatever it may be. And there's ways to work around that and have time off and plan that within a schedule. But my general consensus would be have someone who can sit here and have a conversation about the different mechanisms of these compounds. If someone suggests a testosterone derivative out of the gate, run like fucking hell. And just kind of go through it like with that. So like you're not wanting to see a female start anywhere early in the process with anything that's NPP, Boldenon, testosterone, things along those lines, unless obviously we mentioned the HRT situation.
Sure.
So it's very limited in selection, but they can get a lot further with that limited selection. What I will say is that growth hormone for females is an interesting topic because female conversion of growth hormone into IGF-1 is lower than male conversion of growth hormone into IGF-1.
Mm-hmm.
So the actual anabolic benefit that we get from growth hormone is highly dependent upon an estrogenic component of stack design.
Right.
What did we just say we're not using with females is things that aromatize into estradiol, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I have seen it work. I have seen people use it. I think that it probably maybe has some application from the contest prep side for fatty acid mobilization, more than maybe an off-season setting for a female. I've seen it in clients that have come to me within their off seasons. So, I mean, it's not like people don't use it. Typically that's considered a progression in a sense, but with females, like that conversion rate being a little bit lower, the impact's going to be a little bit lower as well. So, especially knowing like that estradiol component of growth hormone is needed in order to really garner a larger benefit. So, when I have a female that wants to do PEDs, what I do is have a Zoom call with them.
Yeah.
I walk through every compound that we have on the selection table, what the downstream metabolites and side effects would be of these things, what is their access, and then I make the decision based on that. And so some people, it's like, I can't get Primo, I can't get Masteron, but I can get Anavar. And it's like, okay, well, if we know we can get real Anavar, then I'm going to be safe and we're going to use that first. It's not my preferred method, but it's sometimes just kind of how the cookie crumbles. And there's things that like as a coach make intangible that ability to flex based on what you know about the compound. So that's kind of like my general consensus is that, and then don't let the durations go too long, and then take time off between. I see so many people just do a cycle, come off, and then haven't even had any basic hormonal restoration before they're back on again. It's like, like, let's not do that. That's a recipe for disaster. So patience for a female is the biggest thing, especially if you have a counterpart that competes, a male counterpart that competes and is like blasting 20 weeks out of the 20 weeks in a row and then is off for 8 and then back on for 20, right?
Yeah.
It can psychologically be pretty tough. She's like, this fucker is progressing at a rate that's like, this is not cool. But understand that like it's out of a desire to maintain your health over the long term. For most females, the ability to compete long term is how they get to the highest levels.
For sure. And that's how you get big.
Yep.
Like giving
that
it.
Cover everything on the PED side that you wanted to dive. I mean, because I can dive as deep as you want.
I know. I think that was a good one. I think that's a nice introduction to it. But I think what I would like to do is I would like to actually have another podcast with you where we can deep dive really into like the PED side. I think that would be really cool actually for women, because there's a lot of things that are going around at the moment with everything that you just said there, really, like, you know, first point of call being testosterone and then cardarine. And the cardarine thing is very interesting because obviously cardarine is an endurance enhancer. So people obviously say that it's a fat loss metabolite or a fat loss SARM, where actually it just increases your endurance capacity to go at cardio just a little bit harder and for a little bit longer. So it's more stamina based.
And it's a PPAR agonist as well, which will mobilize fatty acid, but we can actually use telmisartan to stimulate PPAR, which you're probably thinking, why am I suggesting an ARB? Which is, for those who don't know, is an angiotensin receptor blocker. It's for blood pressure. Yeah. ARBs are very commonly used now in preventative medicine. So like in comprehensive health medicine, that and metformin. And there's actually a study that just came out about, and this is for metformin, but lowering the inflammatory capacities with metformin in play versus the others, right? And so telmisartan, I think, has some benefits that if you're dabbling in PED use, it's almost an intangible to keep in play. Obviously, unless you run low blood pressures, like let's not throw an ARB at someone that runs low blood pressures, but no. For someone who trends a little high, I mean, I don't think it's a question. I think getting a telmisartan script, like I'm prepping right now and I have 20 mgs in, and my blood pressure comes down drastically when I prep, but the 20 mg dose of telmisartan doesn't pull me into low blood pressures. So low in the sense of like going hypo. So that would be my kind of big thing, is like maybe understand some of the longevity compounds we can use as well, as long as side health supplementation, in order to keep your capacity to compete long term.
For sure. Absolutely. No, I mean, that's absolutely excellent. And I like I said, I'd like to bring you back on. I think that we'd have a really good conversation in terms of like PED use, especially in females. And again, like, you know, guys, everybody who's listening, we have very open and honest conversations on these kind of things, because I want people to be real and I want people to be open to what is actually going on, and that coaches should be a little bit more open and aware and track all of these tangents that we need to do. So I think that would be amazing. Now, I know we've been talking for like an hour and 15 minutes, which is incredible. And I'm sure because you are almost inside out shredded, your arse is starting to hurt a little bit from sitting down. So I'm going to allow you to go. But one question that I ask everybody at the end of the podcast, because it always keeps them on their toes: if you could choose 3 people to sit down and have dinner with, living or dead, who would they be and why?
Oh, fucking A.
Always gets them.
Living or dead? I would love to sit down and pick Elon Musk's brain.
Oh, interesting one. Yeah, okay.
Just from a business perspective, that dude runs one of the best businesses in the world. Tesla, if nobody knows, does no marketing. $0 goes into advertisement. Zero. The dude's unbelievable brain. Just would love to sit down and have a conversation with him. Dinner with, I think it would be interesting to have a conversation with Jay Cutler. I think he epitomizes the individual that not only competed at the highest level, but has been an advocate for the sport and moving it forward. in many different facets. He's probably the first person that really brought to attention the side of bodybuilding that should be asking athletes to be advocates outside of just competing, and his public presence. And like, how many stories have you heard of Jay? Like, he's the first one to show up, last one to leave, right? Plus, I'm just a big fan of his physique. I think that quad stomp picture is one of the most classic pictures I've ever seen. I used to have it as a background on my phone before I got married. Before I got married, and I had someone that's a little bit more important to me.
Oh yeah.
And third one, God, this is tough. This is tough. Alive or dead? Oh man. It'd be one of the two, and I would lean maybe towards Kobe. It's going to be Kobe or Michael Jordan, and I maybe would lean towards Kobe because he's dead.
Yeah.
But just that mentality of greatness. I'm very, very, very influenced by anybody who is the best or one of the greatest at whatever it is they do. I appreciate passion, and like, my brand is no switch fitness, like having no off switch in the pursuit of results, right? Like, that mentality has been embedded in me since the beginning. So like, having a conversation with, like, my favorite documentary is the Michael Jordan documentary on Netflix, like fucking hands down. So probably one of those two, maybe Kobe, just because he is a family man and he does have kids, and just like balancing that and the Mamba mentality and all that. And I'm a little bit of a shoe junkie too, so it kind of like, I've had my fair share of Mambas and Jordans. So it'd probably be one of those two. I'd probably lean towards Kobe just because of the recent happenings over the past, with his death.
Of course.
But yeah, just really get into the minds of those kinds of people, and like, what is it like? I will say, like, a special mention would be Jocko Willink. And the only reason I say that is because I am surrounded by military individuals.
Okay.
Both my training partners are ex-Marines. My brother-in-law is a Marine. Like, I'm not military, but I have massive respect for anybody who is. And so that might be one that I would throw in, but it's definitely not top three. But Elon, Kobe, and Jay would probably be my dinner.
It sounds like a good dinner party. I think so. So, right, okay, we shall leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, Luke. I really, really appreciate it. Guys, as per usual, give us a like, give us a tag. I will share all of Luke's details underneath the video as per usual. So tag us both in it, and we will see you next time on the next episode of Don't Fear the Wait. So thanks again, Luke. I'll speak to you very soon.
Thank you.